Okay, so I'll try again, and I guess what I'll do is I'll go back to doing the lower quality. I was just doing it more so to test in theory, right? So it's on 480p now, which again doesn't matter because there's nothing really on the screen. So let me go here and we say, again, what is folly favoritism and why is folly favored? This is a term obviously from my debate format from back in the day. So the key, one of the key nuances to the term is the fact that the favoritism part of it, because there's sometimes this notion that like, oh, entertainment and escapism and sports are like the opium of the masses and like the, you know, to distract people, and like, oh, the elite are using those things to control you. But that's not actually entirely true, right? You ultimately, with entertainment and escapism, that's not the sort of thing that's forced on people, and in fact, it's even chosen and desired somewhat. So it's a comfort, it's like a distraction, it's a, you know, something that you almost are tricked into desiring, like, oh, you want it, you enjoy it, right? So, and I also call it from an absolutist perspective like a last refuge of freedom or self-actualization. So for example, it's similar to the superficiality protest I was talking about before. So what it means is, again, folly meaning entertainment, escapism, etc., right? Could be games, could be books, could be movies, could be a lot of things like that. Sports, you know, even activities like that, or just watching them, consuming them. And again, favoritism to imply that you are in control of it. You're choosing it, you're desiring it, you're enjoying it, right? Again, nobody can really force that on you, but this is more so the conclusion of it, is that the conclusion is the simple fact that you choose it, but why do you choose it? Because everything meaningful that would actually have an impact in your life, right? Any productive action, anything, you know, self-actualizing, relevant, is so rigidly structured and controlled and monopolized by either government or big corporations or other people, right? It's sort of monopolized to the point where you have to do it within a rigidly controlled structure or not do it at all. So the only freedom that you really have, or the only last refuge you have, is, oh, you can do escapism freely, you can do entertainment freely, you can do, again, folly favoritism freely, right? So you have as much choice and freedom in that as you want, for the most part, but so anything meaningful would be controlled, and so this is the only thing that's left free. So that's why it would appeal to people, right? Because, oh, you finally get to be free when you do something instead of it being completely controlled, and you need permission, and you need to do this, you know, this workaround, that workaround, this protocol, that, you know, red tape, all these different kind of things that you have to worry about. So what that means is that again, you choose it, but you choose it as the one thing that's left free. So think about it, like everything in your life, everything impactful, meaningful, productive, you know, relevant, would be controlled and restricted, restrained, inhibited, right, in some way. So, okay, this is the one thing that's left that's actually free, right, would be, again, entertainment, escapism, etc. That would be truly free. And not only that, but it's also a distraction from the cognitive dissonance of a contrived state and society. So the whole irony of it is there's a fallacy of influence baked into here, where you have the simple ability to consider the fact that you know, you might see people say, okay, the reason why the youth is so in such a negative state is because of entertainment, you know, oh, they're playing video games, or oh, whatever, right? Rock and roll music, and they'll use all these things as an excuse of influence, like, oh, it's a negative influence. The problem with that is it's kind of the opposite, right? You'll say that, oh, if it wasn't for this entertainment or escapism, then they'd be in a better state. But don't you think that the reason why it appeals to them, or even appeals to them so much, right, if they seem to be obsessed with it, is because of the is because of like, it's a reaction rather than a reason. Like, oh, if it wasn't for that, then people would all be perfect. But before those things existed, right, obviously that wasn't the case. So it's more a reaction. Like, again, it's the only thing that's left free after the immense inhibition of a contrived state, where everything meaningful is controlled, so this is the only thing left free. But the second part of that is, it's not that people behave a certain way because of the influence of it. Rather, they choose it in the first place because, why? To distract themselves from the cognitive dissonance of society and certain contrivances. So you might think that validates it, like, oh, look, this person, engages in folly, favoritism all the time, and oh, look, they're playing video games all the time. You might think that validates something, like, oh, look, that's a negative influence, or that somehow discredits them. But what it actually shows is they're sort of disacknowledging the contrivant state, right, and distracting themselves from the cognitive dissonance. So you might think that's a position, like, oh, look, like, that's something that they want. Like, oh, they want entertainment, they want escapism, they want the distraction. They might not want it, or they might not vouch for it, but it's the only thing left to them that is free and uninhibited, and that they can distract themselves from the cognitive dissonance of the contrivance that's forced on them. So it can be a neutral and a non-state, right? You're doing it as a default, like, okay, to distract yourself and occupy yourself, but it's not a desire. You don't want it. It's just the only thing that's left to you amid all the inhibition and distraction, and, or like, so you feel like you don't have to vouch for the contrivance state that you're in. It's like a net neutral state. So you'd say, you don't vouch for or acknowledge contrivance, and again, the cognitive dissonance to go along with it. And so what does that mean? It means that you're not vouching for it, and you're distracting yourself from it. So rather than blame that, you're blame that as an influence, like, oh, because of the influence of it, that leads to a negative outcome. Instead, it could be the opposite, where because of that cognitive dissonance and inhibited state, that's why you're drawn to it in the first place, right? I'll say it more simply, like, just like you say, oh, somebody's antisocial because they're play video games all the time, so it's the video game's fault that they're, or whatever, movies, TV, etc. That's why they're antisocial. But couldn't it be the opposite? The reason why it appeals to them in the first place over people, or instead of people, or whatever it is that you're comparing, the reason why it appeals to them in the first place, this is my concept of opposite interpretation, right? You'll say, oh, it's because of the entertainment that the person is antisocial. But couldn't it be that maybe they're antisocial and that's why the entertainment appeals to them, or instead of that? Or again, I'll say it like this, like an addict, right, with alcohol. An addict, like with alcohol, right, you'll say, oh, the reason why they're antisocial is because they're an alcoholic. It's because of the alcohol that makes them that way, you see? But what about the fact that the alcohol would appeal to them in the first place, and appeal to them so much, maybe would indicate that that's a preference. Like, maybe they don't like people or care about people much in the first place. That's why they do it, right? So forget about, like, don't blame the influence. Realize that the influence is a choice. Like, oh, the reason why alcohol appeals to them in the first place is because of certain tendencies or desires and preferences that they have. So again, it's not so much the influence or the blame. It's more like, oh, that there's a reason why they prefer that in the first place, right? Why you would prefer entertainment or escapism to people, or why you would prefer, So again, you look at it from the opposite perspective, that you blame an influence instead of realizing the cause of it, that, why would it appeal to them in the first place if, right, there must be something why they prefer that, some reason why they prefer that. So getting back to, again, folly, favoritism, escapism, why does it appeal to people? It's a way to distract themselves. But again, from that neutral state, it's like, that must mean you enjoy it, or that means you want it and you like it. Or does it just mean it's the only thing left to you that doesn't require you to vouch for the contrivance state, or doesn't it doesn't lead to you actively trying to destroy and disrupt the contrivance state and then face consequences for that. So you're not going to be anti-contrivance, but you're also not going to be pro-contrivance, where you have to vouch for it and pretend like the artifice of it is actually absolute. So what is the middle ground? You tolerate it, you do it as little as possible or not at all, and you distract yourself from the cognitive dissonance associated with it. So it would be interesting to see those sort of positions on it, right? Like, it's because of this influence, or because they're doing this. But dig one step deeper. Why is it that people do that, right? You could ridicule it. Okay, look at this. People are, obsessed with movies and TVs and games and whatever, right? And you'll blame that for some state that they're in. But why? Why do they like those things? Why do they like them so much? Why would they be so fixated on them? Why would they prefer them to other things? And the answer is the fact that, you're able to the answer is that you're able, again, to distract yourself. So it's kind of an odd thing, right? The very same contrivance state that would inhibit everything to a degree and leave only entertainment and escapism free because, it doesn't have any impact and it's not a threat to established power structure or whatever, right? That would be the only thing that's left free by them. Everything else is inhibited. What are the chances then that people might prefer it or like it for that reason? Or number two, the fact that it is a distraction from the cognitive dissonance brought about by the contrivance state in the first place. The false framing of an influence is present there, rather than why do you prefer it in the first place? Right? Why would it appeal to you at all if something else was preferable? And number two is the fact that it's the fact that that, again, it's the only thing left free. It's distracting, cognitive dissonance. Also, it's the fact that, again, you're not necessarily having to vouch for the contrivance state. You're more so just, you're sort of being neutral. That, like, okay, you would rather. There's a certain expression I have here. Okay, so this one's a little bit, I'm not getting quite what I wanted out of this discussion, because I was trying to do it in the morning and I was kind of more mentally ready. Now I'm kind of pissed that it kept crashing, so I didn't do it until now, so whatever. But let me try to remember what I said about this. Like, I had this expression, there's more truth in fiction for this reason, right? Like, often if you try to say something or challenge something directly in society, it'll be ridiculed or censored or dismissed, right? So you have to use the guise of fiction. So this is one reason why fiction exists in the first place. The idea that, you could express certain things about society or government or whatever that you normally couldn't do, because, again, you'll be censored or targeted. But you can do it in analogy, like, 1984 or something like that, right? So you can disguise it in analogy. You can disguise an analogy and hypotheticals in fiction, something that otherwise you couldn't say directly, because then it would be censored, etc. So that's one reason to subvert censorship, etc., and accountability. And the second reason is the fact that second reason is the fact that, again, that there's more truth in fiction, would be my logical razor, that with social contrivance and society, you have to pretend something is valuable for the extent of some functional basis. So that's the difference. You don't inherently practice zero-sum functionalism, like, okay, I'm doing this exact action for this exact result or means. You pretend and overextend, like, okay, I'm going to appeal to the ego of others, I'm going to subvert my own ego, I'm going to, again, engage in the social contrivance that is artificial and sort of fool myself and trick myself, again, subvert the self for the collective for the self, this sort of constant bypassing and deception. So that's the whole irony of it, is that you might think, oh, well, entertainment, escapism is fiction, it's fake. But what's the difference in those two scenarios? With entertainment, escapism, what are you acknowledging? You know it's fake, so you're not pretending, right? So you're acknowledging, okay, this thing is fake, and I'm doing it just to distract myself. And so you acknowledge it's fake, and so you're aware of that, and that's fine. The difference with this is the fact that the difference with social contrivance in society is that's fake, that's artificial, that's overextended, but you have to pretend that it's real. So that's the difference, right? One of them is fake, but you can acknowledge it's fake. One of them is fake, but you have to pretend it's not, right? And you have to take it seriously. So that's why there's more comfort in that, or like, oh, again, there's more truth in fiction because you're at least acknowledging it's fake than in reality, supposed reality. Or, again, you can bypass censorship and so forth as well, and so therefore you can obviously find more truth than otherwise. So, oh my god. So that's some analysis of favoritism. You also have, again, why does it appeal? What does it reflect? You can blame it as an influence, but again, the fact that it's preferred would indicate something, and that can be the neutrality. And so on one hand, it hurts the credibility of a contrivance state, that you would say, why should that be necessary or preferred in a value state, like in a consistent logical state of being? Why would somebody do it, right? So on one hand, it's something that has no impact on your life and therefore would not be, no functional basis, no impact on your life. So why would you ever do it, right? You'd rather do something productive that actually does have an impact. So it's hard to rationalize that. So it's a subversive state where, again, you're only allowed to do but so much on a functional basis. Otherwise, it's structured, it's controlled, it's limited, inhibited, monopolized. So then you have the ability to realize. So you'll do it because it's the only thing that's left free. Or, again, why should you need to distract yourself with something that isn't real and doesn't have impact? Doesn't that hurt the credibility then of society that, okay, if you're in such an absolute state or a credible state, why do you need to distract yourself from it? Right, shouldn't you be in a consistently logical state where you can just be, where you shouldn't need that? Okay, so, again, on one hand, you would say, if society and contrivance is credible, then why would you do something that doesn't have any impact on your life whatsoever? Why would you value that? It's hard to explain. And why would you need to distract yourself with it in the first place? So, you would see the indignant insistence on a functional basis, but then you would see inconsistency that, oh, so you don't really value yourself or your life or a standard or a measure or a society or contrivance. You pretend to, or you do it to a degree, and then you have to distract yourself from the cognitive dissonance and the inhibited subversive state that you're reduced to. So it hurts the credibility there. Meanwhile, it might be used to get credibility too, like, oh, look at this person, look at certain people doing it, right? But how does that give you credibility? Because your society is built on that too. So it doesn't really, you're both doing it to distract, but one might be doing it more, or trying not to vouch for contrivance by doing that, whereas you would pretend to vouch for it, but then you're inconsistent in your treatment. So again, it definitely hurts credibility. So think about, like, okay, let's say it wouldn't exist at all. Entertainment, escapism don't exist, and everything is just about something productive and functional basis, right? You might think, oh, it has some positive psychological effects or this or that, but again, that wouldn't be necessary if you're living in a sound, consistent state that, right, is logical. Then everything would be productive, functional basis. It would be based in a standard or a measure that you have that you're trying to be consistent with. Instead, again, you're giving up on something like, okay, we can't do something productive all the time because we're inhibited by society that prevents us from doing that. So now we're left with just this way to distract ourselves from that in a state that's totally inconsistent, that you can't rationalize at all and has no credibility whatsoever. So the outsider who, oh, they engage in escapism, that's their preference, that's their addiction, that's actually a non-vouching for contrivance state, where they're distracting themselves from the cognitive dissonance and tolerating it. So it doesn't hurt their credibility, it's actually consistent because they're not vouching for the contrivance state. But it does hurt the credibility of the contrivance state because, oh, now you have to distract yourself, so it's not credible at all. Because, see, one of them is an outward state and one of them is neutrality. So think about it, I'll say it very directly here. One person treats society as absolute and vouches for it. The other one, the second person, observes the artifice of contrivance, and it's just, it can be a tool, it can be functional, but it's the artifice of the contrivance state. So it's not real, it's not absolute, right? So they don't vouch for it. So the problem with that is the fact that the first person, though, will then distract themselves from that supposed absolute with, again, subversive things like folly, favoritism, entertainment, escapism. But that would hurt their credibility because it's not an absolute state then that you need that distraction. Whereas the second person would be saying they're not vouching for the state at all. Because it's not absolute, they're not vouching for it, so they're just, again, reacting to it and distracting themselves and tolerating it, and again, it's the only thing left free by it. So there's a bit of a big difference in those two. We can see one of them doesn't vouch for contrivance, the other one, again, does, but it's not credible because it has to distract itself. So, and one awareness fallacy here comes in that, like, the degree of freedom to be aware of something is then condemned, like, oh, if this person is successful or rich, like, oh, they're out of touch. Is it out of touch, or is it the fact that they're free from the need to pretend something because of some functional incentive, zero-sum basis, right? So pretend you're a trillionaire, right? You hit the lottery or whatever. Now you don't have to pretend to do things that otherwise you do only for a functional, shallow, zero-sum basis. So it's not really about the individual, it's about the nature of the process. So, oh, you're only doing this thing because of some incentive that you have. And so now if you no longer have that incentive, now you no longer need to do it. But it's overextended and pretended like, oh, you want that, or you desire that, or you choose that. So let me think of a few more things to do with folly favoritism here. But again, it raises a few important existential questions, like, why would a person focus on something that has no impact on their life and isn't real, right? Similar to religion. So I would use this as a defense, actually, of religion in one sense, right? That, I could say, like, okay, if I'm not religious, I could criticize it and say, how can a person believe in something that isn't real, right? How can you do that? How can you value your time, put time and energy and effort into something you know isn't real, in the case of religion? But guess what? You would say back, this religious person could say, but wait a second, you put time and effort and energy into things that aren't real too, like books and movies and shows and games and things like that. You know those things aren't real, but you still put time and energy and effort into them. So what does that mean? So in other words, in the same way that religion might not be real or true, but it can have positive psychological effects on people and can be similar to fiction in that way. I guess the main operative difference, though, that I would have pointed out would be the fact that one of them, like I just said with society, one of them pretends to be real and one of them doesn't. So like that would be the way to counter it. You'd say, oh, well, entertainment escapism is the same thing. How can you value something that's not real, that you know isn't real, but you value it, but you don't pretend that it's real. You know it's not real, you acknowledge it's not real, but you still do value it anyway. Whereas with religion, you would pretend it's real and then value it. But in either case, it still has a certain credibility factor to say, you would assume the credibility to say, well, everything in your life has to be based in reality and objective truth and accountability and functional basis, right? But your life isn't like that if you engage in folly favoritism, so it does hurt your credibility, right? How can you believe in this fairy tale of this invisible man in the sky and, religion is fake and it's not real, so how can you believe in it? How can you put your time and energy and effort into it? But, oh, wait a second, the person saying that and questioning that, is their life fully based in truth and logic and reason? And it's not, because again, they engage in folly favoritism and escapism and, again, entertainment. So, again, those are things that you know aren't real, but yet you waste time and energy and effort on them, right? So that would be the rebuttal there. And you also have that's the expression and the question that I would ask. Why is folly favored? Is it to distract yourself from the cognitive dissonance of society, contrived state? Is it to not vouch for that artifice? Is it because there's more truth in fiction because it bypasses censorship? Is it because of the fact that, again, it's a lack of credibility that is necessary? It doesn't serve a functional basis, right? It has no impact on your life. And again, the psychological argument is a bit weak because you say, oh, but it has a positive psychological effect on people, but that wouldn't be necessary because you're overcompensating for some imbalance that's being created, right? Like, if you take away the imbalanced contrivance state that you're in, then you wouldn't need to distract yourself from it, right? So it's a reaction, like, oh, it's just escapism and distraction, but from what, right? And so if there was nothing to distract yourself from, then your life could be more in a balanced state where you're at peace with it and you don't need to do that. So it's a distraction and an overcompensation for a unnatural, imbalanced, contrived state. And so, let me try to think. This is hard for me to do sometimes because I have to rehash and remember things that I said like a decade ago. Although some of them I've said since then, but that's a big part of the experience. Like, just going back and remembering some of my old takes and stuff. So what else would we say with that? So it doesn't necessarily discredit the outsider or somebody who's, in a neutral state. Because see, that's not really vouching for society. If you say, okay, somebody just spends all their time distracting themselves with entertainment, it's like escapism. They're not vouching for the state, then they're saying, right, I'm just going to distract myself and not take it seriously. So, right, you distract yourself, you don't vouch, you don't take it seriously, you don't care. But it's one of the only things left free to you, a way to just occupy yourself, way to just distract yourself. And it's also like one of those things that take it in a half-mast way. Like, if you take then folly, favoritism, escapism too seriously, then oh no, that's not a good thing either. But then if you don't do it at all, that's also negative. So you see a society that preconceives things and insists upon them that way. Like, that's what you'll see with younger people, especially, they're always quoting something that they've seen, or they're always, obsessing over certain things. So not only is it not impactful, but it's also something you don't choose necessarily, sort of just very reactive. But in a way I do say that because again, the empirical authority, like, it's like bread and circuses to distract the masses. But the reality is you can't do that, because you can't just force people to be happy with that. Ultimately, people have to be lazy and weak and complacent, and that they go along with that they're satisfied by that they're distracted by that. So it's ultimately a choice. You blame the audience, is my expression there. Like, you can't force people to engage in escapist behavior, right? You can make the content, you can try to push people into it, but you can't force people to do that. They could just as easily not do it, right? Just don't value it, and then what? Now you hold something else accountable. So the modern bread and circuses is like the welfare system. So you'd say, somebody getting aid from the government who otherwise would be poor and starving. You might think, that's a good positive thing to help people, but actually it's not. Why does welfare exist, and why do programs like that exist? So it gives people money, gives them enough to live on, whereas otherwise they wouldn't have enough to live on, right? So what would happen then? It prevents people from revolting, because what would happen? Those people are going to be starving and without a place to live, or things like that. And so if there's enough people who are in that position, those people are going to revolt. They're not going to just sit around. They're going to revolt. They're going to start a rebellion. You to, again, there's a very direct way that I said it that I honestly can't remember. So, like, again, we'll give you welfare. We'll give you the food, right? You'll survive. Instead, if we didn't give you that, then what would happen, right? So that shows you like a bankrupt society in this sense. Whether you say like, we'll go into great debt, we're trillions in debt and stuff like this. Pretend it was a zero-sum sense, right? It would already be in a revolting state, because you have right, if you did it in a direct mathematical way, you wouldn't have enough. There's not enough means to actually do that, right, without going trillions in debt. So you already would have a revolting society. But, we're going to subvert it more. We're going to just print money that we don't have and deflate the value of money and give that money to people who otherwise would be poor or homeless. And so give the illusion of sustainability and appease them, keep them happy with the bread, and with enough to survive on, let them distract themselves, and so they'll be content and they won't revolt and won't riot. So it's a very relevant distinction that you would understand the connection between the two. And I think my stream did just crash, so maybe I some part of that got cut off. But basically that's what I was just saying is, why does welfare exist? Why do certain programs like that exist? It might seem like out of genuine concern for people, like, oh, it's good, we're trying to help people, we're doing something positive. But actually, again, it's just a way to control them and to try to appease them, so then, okay, normally they would revolt and starve and they'd be homeless. And so now they're not going to just sit around, they're going to revolt and rebel against the power structure, right? But, oh no, we're going to bribe you and give you free stuff that we actually can't even afford and don't have the means to do just by printing money and, devaluing the currency, right? So because you think about it, you can't create something that way, right? You can't just create something from nothing. So when you do that, you are paying a tax, that's like inflation tax. So it's a good trick of modern government, but, so like that money, that wealth doesn't exist. And it doesn't, and you don't create it by printing money. You just devalue the money that's already there. And so it's like you're getting this non-consensual inflation tax. And again, then you use that money to appease the people that would be homeless or starving or whatever, so that they don't revolt. So you're stealing money from everyone else to keep the people that would revolt against you from doing that. So you keep them complacent within giving them free stuff, and so they can have their free rent, they can have their free food, they can live off that, they can be satisfied, they can distract themselves. And so let's look at one other final interpretation of folly favoritism, where it's a deference by the individual. Like, okay, I won't revolt against an unqualified empirical authority structure. Okay, I won't, I'll defer to this, contrived state. I'll follow its rules, and despite all its inconsistencies and contradictions, I'm not going to, try to defy it or hold it accountable. I'm not going to, actively revolt against it or hold it accountable or do any of that. So I'm going to defer to it, the individual would say, and so then distract themselves with that. So it's a form of like, you're kind of tolerating it. Like, okay, fine, I'll tolerate it and I'll distract myself here and I'll put up with it. But that doesn't mean I'm vouching for it. That doesn't mean it actually is valid or qualified or absolute or, anything like that. So again, the alternative, okay, let's get rid of escapism and entertainment. Now you're going to hold it, like pretend every waking hour that people spend on entertainment was spent on something productive, trying to help starving people, trying to cure cancer, trying to make renewable energy, trying to do something productive, even in a zero-sum sense, just for yourself, right? You did an extra job or something. It sort of goes back to an existential pointlessness that people feel, like, okay, do something productive then in the time that you would normally be distracting yourself with entertainment, escapism, and then you might say, oh, but then what's the point? It's like, so a distraction takes on, this is one of my great quotes, actually. I love this quote from a short story where I say, that which was meant to that which was meant to kill time fills it instead, right? Describing a character who is basically obsessed with entertainment and escapism. So, right, that which was meant to kill time, like just to, pass the time, fills it instead, meaning you're doing that as the main primary thing, right? It just has a nice rhythm to it. I like that, and it rhymes and everything. That which was meant to kill time fills it instead. And then there was a corresponding quote too to that, similar, where it goes like, a passion isn't something you make time for, it's something you take time away from for everything else, right? So the thing that you're passionate about or that you most value, right? A passion isn't something you make time for. It's something you take time away from for everything else. So those are two very good quotes of mine from the past, which again, I haven't properly chronicled, but I do like that. And they kind of go sort of hand in hand. But one of them, again, is describing escapism that way. So we're really going deep into the archives with this. This is pretty good. This is actually like a long time coming. Maybe I should have done this a long time ago, but... And we're dealing with the crashes and all this bullshit along the way. I have half a mind to just try to record it. Like, it'd be the same thing. Right? Nobody's watching this anyway, so for now, I just prefer doing it because it seems like a net positive, like if somebody does want to, but... Right, so that was a good discussion. I'll try to upload these more, right, you know,